Jane found out that her mom was actually bipolar.
This is a huge part of her design as well, because she is so collective.
Oh, dude, it is a huge part of her life.
Exactly. Yeah, well, thank God. Because it means she's living her design.
The issue is that he didn't want to be alone. He kind of wanted a trophy wife.
HeartCore, the Human Design Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of HeartCore, the Human Design Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin. So, this episode is going to be another interesting one because I have no idea about their history. So, I'm super curious as to what their lives looked like. Also, when I was looking at their charts, I saw some of the returns, Saturn return, Chiron return, and I was like, oh my God, that was so long ago. The second Saturn return, it was already so long ago. And I'm just, yet to have people like this, to look at their charts, to look at their lives, very fascinating. So I'm going to hand over the mic to Celestina, who's on the other side of the world.
Hey guys, if you're watching this video right now, please enjoy the juxtaposition of me in like full summer wear and Miko in full Arctic wear. So, good times here for the visuals.
Forgot to mention that. There is an explanation, but it's going to take a lifetime to explain it. So let's just leave it at what it is. It's very cold here. No heating, so.
And I have the opposite problem. I'm sitting in a 20-degree apartment and it's delightful. That's 20 degrees Celsius, like 70-ish Fahrenheit. It's delightful. Nonetheless, we're here to talk about Jane and Lily, two of the most iconic ladies in Hollywood. The amount that they've done, not just in Hollywood, but like outside of that, advocating for different things, is just so dope. So we are going to start with Jane Fonda. She was born Lady Jane Seymour Fonda. Yes, Lady, L-A-D-Y, and Jane with a Y. She hated it. She was born December 21st, 1937 in New York. And she was born to Henry Fonda, her father, and Frances Ford Seymour. Add a Fonda at the end of that. She ended up moving to LA with her parents like at a fairly young age. So she doesn't really, like, though she was born in New York, she associates herself with like having grown up in like the Hollywood Hills and going to school with other famous people's kids, as one did in the 40s in Hollywood. She had a younger brother as well, so it was her younger brother, and then a stepsister. So her mom had an older daughter from a previous marriage. Dude, just her mom's history is like something you can like deep dive into. I started Jane Fonda's book that she wrote in like the early 2000s, and wow. Just this stuff on her mom, like you can deep dive into. So, but we're gonna go back to Jane. So she grew up in LA. She was a tomboy, wanted nothing to do with her name, Lady Jane. She was very, very, very conditioned from a young age. And she goes through a lot of this in her book, being like, I sought out my father's attention. She really just wanted to be like loved by her dad. And he did not pay attention to her in like a positive way, or any way really, unless they were like out fishing and she could like hook a line, right? And like that was something she could do, but her brother would get squeamish. So that was something she was conditioned to be like, okay, cool, I can do this. I can be this person that my dad wants me to be. And that is what affected her a lot in life. A ton of daddy issues. And I feel like in the quote unquote third act of her life is like how she breaks it down in her book. So like in her 60s when she was writing that book, that's when she really has time to reflect on this. And I don't think a lot of that was happening at a young age in the moment. But third act Jane Fonda was definitely very reflective on this. Very turbulent, tumultuous childhood. I believe at the age of like 7, her and her family moved from LA to Connecticut because her dad got an acting gig in New York, and being in Connecticut was like still farm lifey enough, but also like he was able to commute back on the weekends to see them. she said she felt like he didn't want to come back, right? Like he loved his city life. He didn't want the responsibilities of kids, of a wife. It's kind of hard when you've committed to kids and a wife, you know? I think it was about a year into being there, he was doing the commuting back and forth, and then he filed for divorce. And her mom did not take it very well. In hindsight, in going back in some of those documents, Jane found out that her mom was actually bipolar, and this was very, very challenging for her. So she was institutionalized several times by her family, and it wasn't necessarily out of her own free will, right? Like, who's really institutionalized out of their own free will? But her mom was institutionalized and then was on really good behavior, convinced the nursing staff to like let her out, went to go see her kids, what she believed at that point was her one last time to see her kids, and Jane refused to see her. No one had told Jane where the mom went, right? Like she didn't know she was in a hospital. She just thought that she abandoned them. And that's really the mindset and mentality that she had towards her mom. Very little respect, very little understanding, mostly because there was a veil around all of it. Her grandmother wasn't honest with her, like her dad wasn't honest with her, and she was just really frustrated by her mom not being there and not feeling the love and compassion for her. That was the last time that her brother ended up seeing her mom. She refused to go downstairs, and on that trip home, her mom ended up like sneaking a razor blade back with her and completed suicide when she got back to the institution, like a couple of weeks later. She left them all notes, each of the family members individually. However, Jane's grandmother got rid of the note.
Oh my God.
Before she could ever read it. Yeah, and this is all before like the age of 10. Like, this is really intense. She was like 7 or 8 when this happened. So like this is just super intense. She wasn't really close to her older sister, so it's not like she had a female figure. Her dad did remarry, and I believe she was only like 22. So she was maybe like 10 or 11 and this chick was 22. Again, reflecting back, she recognized that this woman taught her how to be a stepmother. There was love there. She brought joy, she brought laughter. This was like the first time the family ever had experienced this together. Her dad was still pretty distant, and this woman could only be as involved as a stepmother can be involved when you're only like 11 or 12-ish years older than the oldest kid. You know, so it was a very weird dynamic, weird relationship, but she was still super grateful for having this woman in her life and being able to teach her happiness to some extent, right? That she didn't really have before. She then went to an all-girls school for high school, or like prep school, and had some very interesting, I guess, friendships, relationships there. This is where she, I guess, had like a weird mixed view of sexuality as a whole. I believe she said she had a babysitter or a governess at some point, and she doesn't exactly remember what happened, but there could have been some type of like taking advantage of her, like the governess and her boyfriend while Jane was watching. She like has blanked it out of her memory, probably for the better. But yeah, so there was definitely a lot of mixed feelings about like sexuality, her sexuality, what is expected, and all of that kind of came up in her teens and her 20s, and that was also very much linked to her value. Kind of going back to the relationship that she had with her parents, it wasn't great, and she saw her mom as weak. When her dad left, she's like, okay, well, she needed a strong man to like uplift her, and she crumbled when he left, right? Like that's the side that she saw, and that's what she was looking for. She was looking for a quote-unquote strong man when she was looking for relationships. Someone that, if she did everything right, quote-unquote, would still love her and support her, and regardless of the red flags that she probably didn't see at that time, it was what it was. So she moved to Paris for one of her first acting gigs, loved living there. So she ended up meeting her husband, French filmmaker Roger Vadim, and they had a child together, but she was also a stepmother to his first daughter. And that's where she was taking from the woman who became her stepmother, like the beauty that she brought to their relationship. She tried to do that as a stepmother as well, right? So that was her first step away from the really rugged and like challenging childhood that she had, to try and change that for the next generation. She felt at this point though that she was still kind of under this haze. And again, this is her at 60 looking back, right? So in the moment, in her early 20s, she didn't see this, didn't feel this, but she was definitely making career choices based on the men in her life. She put her value on the men in her life and felt like she could only succeed if she had that pedestal to stand upon. Backtracking a wee bit, this started happening while she was at boarding school. She and one of her friends were reading about Roman society. What a weird way to come about this, but reading about Roman society and them engorging themselves, and then to be able to eat more, vomiting, and taking part in like bulimia, anorexia. And they did that, I think, occasionally, sometimes, just so they could like eat more for fun. And then it became something that she would just do in private, and like that's when it really took over as an addiction for her. That persisted into her 40s. So 30 years of bulimia and hiding it. I think that that's just kind of an important note to see the timeline of where that started, and then note that all of these other things kind of happened post facto as well. Any questions so far, Nico? We're getting heavy.
No questions, but you are giving a lot. This is yeah, it's really great information. So I keep also sometimes shifting back and forth to the chart, and maybe it's actually a good place to take a look at her chart, and then we continue her story.
That works. There's a lot more. So yes, let's get into some human design.
I can imagine, yeah, because I'm just going to point out the things that I'm looking at when you're telling me the story. And this is what I find so fascinating. I mean, I love watching people and hearing their stories, but simply just also watching their way of acting and behaving and tying it back to human design. So for me, these little history lessons or these biographies that you're sharing with us or with me as well, because I have no idea of their history. So for me, it's super intriguing to go back and forth between human design and what you're saying. And one of the things that I was looking at, for now, explain my process. So when you were talking about the childhood of hers, where she was being rejected by her father and also pretty much by her mother, or she didn't receive the love that she desired and needed as a child as well. And her design, Mars, is in line 4. So it is, first of all, it's in gate 11, line 4, the gate of ideas, and it's connected to the 56 gate. It's unconsciously defined, only unconsciously defined in her chart. Gate 11, I mean. And line 4, when you're looking at Mars, is actually all about rejection. So the line of the design Mars tells you a lot about the childhood wound. And in her case, her wound is rejection. So that her experience has really put this traumatic thing, implanted that into her. And she was susceptible to this as well with her design Mars. But additionally, what we will be seeing, I assume, because I don't know much about her, I only know that she started this fitness empire. I don't know, she was very, very well known for her fitness side. To me, even more known than her Hollywood appearances. I didn't even know that she was really an actress until we started talking about it. For me, she was really prominent for this fitness lifestyle. And this is a very important part of her incarnation cross. She is the vessel of love. So she has the 46 gate defined in her chart unconsciously. However, the 46 gate and also the 29th gate, which are both defined in her chart, this is giving her the energy to take care of her physical body. This is treating the physical body like a temple. And this is what she was doing. And this is pretty much the only way to heal from this childhood wound of rejection, to really put all of your love, care, and energy into yourself, into the only person that will be there from the first breath you take until the last breath you take. It's only you who's going to be there for the ride. And you are the only one that can consistently provide you with this love and care, and is not going to hopefully reject yourself. So this is really the only way for her.
So we're going to go back to the 70s. We're going to resume in France. It was the late 60s, early 70s. They moved around to a couple of different places because Paris was getting wild and crazy. The US was still in Vietnam. France had pulled out of Vietnam a couple of years earlier. And to get out of all of that craziness, they ended up moving to a farm outside of Paris. That wasn't the vibe. They ended up moving to Saint-Tropez to get away from it. And eventually, none of it was enough. And it was right before she had her first daughter that she had this aha moment of what was actually happening in the world. Prior to that, she wasn't really paying attention to politics. She wasn't really paying attention to what was affecting her, especially as an American living abroad, right? The French had one perspective. She didn't have much of a perspective because she just wasn't interested in it / wasn't privy to it in the 60s. However, in 1971-ish, she had this conversation with one of her French friends, and she's kind of knocking some sense into her and being hey, this is what happened, and your country is supporting it. And she also at that time met soldiers who were stationed in Germany who were against the war. That kind of lit a fire under her booty. She had her daughter during that same time period, married her then partner, and wasn't really feeling it. Literally immediately after the wedding was damn, I thought solidifying this was going to be the end all be all, and it wasn't. She moved back to the States, and that's when she really became passionate about activism.
This is a huge part of her design as well, because she is so collective.
Oh, dude, it is a huge part of her life.
Exactly. Yeah, well, thank God. Because it means she's living her design. She has only collective channels. It's all about sharing. It's all about this activism movement in, yes, maybe protest, but also in her fitness field.
Let me tell you a little bit about the activism, and then we'll flow into fitness. So in 1972, she visited North Vietnam and she rallied. She was famously sitting on an anti-gun aircraft during this period of time, and that sparked widespread controversy for her. I believe she also sang a Vietnamese song, and it was supposed to be kind of this peace offering situation. I don't know if it was actually taken like that. Her going there was kind of polarizing, right? Because she was this Hollywood starlet. Up until this point, she'd chosen roles that kind of, yes, she was girl next door vibes, but she said she never felt girl next door vibes. So she was doing things to kind of push the boundaries sexually and kind of push the boundaries later in a way that could actually transform things and make a difference in the world. Regardless, from then on, she walked in marches in the Pacific Northwest for Native American rights. Unfortunately, though, she recognized that there was polarizing differences when she was walking alongside natives. Because she was in Hollywood, because she was a star, she wasn't beaten when she was arrested. And she'd been arrested probably several times. Now it's probably up to 7 or 8 times that she's been arrested in her life. But she wasn't beaten the same way the native people were. She wasn't treated the same way when she was taken to prison, right? And she saw such a discrepancy there. So when she went back to LA, she was like, why am I doing this? They're not seeing it the same way. This is really frustrating. And one of her friends was like, don't stop. Use your platform for good. Yeah, they may not be treating you the same way, but you can make such a greater impact because of who you are and the voice that you have. So that's really freaking cool. I mean, it sucks. It sucks to not be treated the same way and recognize that and be frustrated by that. But it's also beautiful that her friend was like, dude, you have a lot to offer. Step back, check yourself, and continue to push on for this cause. Staying in this activism piece, the reason she actually got into her fitness journey was because of activism. She wanted to be able to pay to support, I don't recall what it was specifically. They didn't have enough money to fund the activism. So she started this workout program, just like wrote it all down while she was at a hotel. She was pretty into like physical fitness herself at this point, just like taking care of her body. She needed to be convinced though that the recording piece of it was actually going to be worthwhile, because initially it was just going to be like a program on TV and people would like tune in to it. However, at this time, video tapes were becoming a thing. People didn't really have VCRs in their homes though, because I think monetarily they were just out of reach. Think of like DVD players when they first came out, right? Like people really couldn't swing it. With these workout videos, the goal was to make money for activism, and the platform by which to do it was to spread these workouts. In doing that, she nearly single-handedly changed the VCR industry and the home video industry in the 1980s. So crazy, so cool. That's a bit about that. There's one more piece about personal life, but let's look at some activism stuff before I get too far deep in the one more piece of personal life.
I also didn't know that this was the reason why she started this whole fitness thing. One thing that I wanted to mention just before we get into the activism piece as well, because I feel like it may tie into a few areas here and there. You mentioned that she was entering a relationship with a man because she really felt like this was what was missing, and she wanted someone to rely on and to catch her and to just be there, be this manly energy in her life. And when you were talking about this, I noticed that her bridging gates, so she's a split definition and she has two potential bridging gates. One of them being gate 1 and the other one being gate 20. So the one that sprung most into my eye when it came to a relationship is, especially in a heterosexual relationship, was gate 1. Because she has gate 8, but gate 1 it's quote unquote missing, and I don't mean that anything is missing in anyone's design, but what I mean by that is that she doesn't have a consistent energy in her chart within herself, and that may bring out this feeling of I'm lacking this and I need this in my life, so she's going to continue looking for this in other people. And gate 1 is the male energy.
Quick note on that. In her relationship with Roger Vadim, he often brought other women into their relationship as well. And she kind of just like went along with it because of the people pleasing, and that's what she thought she needed to do in that relationship as well.
Interesting. First gate is all yang lines, whereas the second gate on the other side of the mandala is all yin lines. So we could interpret this as well, that she's really looking for this male energy outside of herself, and she's trying to find that in other people, in other partners. And this was increased as well, this lack, this internal feeling of lack was increased by her father. So she really had a lot in her design pointing her or pushing her into a certain direction. We're not going to look at the cycles because that's just going to blow the proportion, but I'm sure that there is also some correlation when it comes to getting divorced, getting married, when it comes to her Saturn return, Chiron return, things like this, which is also another fascinating aspect. But I just found that really interesting that this first gate is not in her chart consistently, and that I think this is really a focus for her. This was the focus for her. Of course, the 1-8 has a lot to do, the first line has a lot to do with creativity, and the 8th gate is about promoting and marketing in a PR sense of way. It's not like the 4426 channel, which is really being able to sell anything to anyone if you want to sell it. So your heart has to be in it. But the 8th gate is more about PR. So it's promoting it with verbal actions or with your voice, with writing, with things like this. But for her, I think this was a big feeling that she's missing this in some way. So I think the first gate was more important than the 20th gate, which is also a bridging gate for her. And now let's take a little look at the collective aspect. So she has 3 collective channels, 6447, the 1156, and the 4629. So for her promotional side, she has the 46 in her sun, so in her unconscious sun, 46.4. And this is really the temple and how to take care of your temple, so your body in this sense. And she has the energy to do so. She has the energy to give consistent energy towards her body, the temple. She has the 29.6. So it's really as well about being a role model and having the consistent life force energy to work on her temple. And I think this was a big part of her fitness journey. So the 4629 was a big part of her fitness journey, of course, but I find it super fascinating that it is linked to the collective activism connection with her 1156, which is in her Pluto and in her Mars. And then she also has the 6447, which is in her Neptunes and in her Mercury. So she has this feminine approach still. This is in her Venus energy, the 4629. This feminine approach, which is a role model energy as well in her, to care for her own body. Additionally, she has the full vessel of love cross. So there are the 10th gate, 15th gate, and 25th gate that are also there for her to provide love for herself, but also to others. People with the vessel of love are, they're often such loving and caring individuals. And I feel like you can also see that when you're looking at her. I think she radiates that. So I don't know what she's like in person, but the way that you've described her until now, I feel like she didn't let this push her down either, all of her experiences, but instead she turned it into something good and something positive, and she really tried to fight for what was right in the world as well.
Yeah. So let's take a look at her relationship with her dad as she got older. So Henry Fonda, while not actively saying that he was also like an activist, he chose movies that were quite poignant and always made some type of statement, whether it was blatant or not. He always chose characters who fought for the little guy, and that was just his MO, which was really cool. Oh, just to give a bit of background about him, he also joined the Navy during World War II. He didn't have to. He was like well past the age of like needing to go, like he wasn't being drafted, and he went and spent a couple of years there, and that was something that he just felt like he had to do. So that's kind of his vibe, right? Like he may not be a great dad, but Jane Fonda said that even though, and actually she was speaking to Martin Luther King Jr.'s daughter about this, that neither of their dads blatantly had these like fundamental conversations with them about things in life, but through their speeches and their acting respectively, their daughters were able to garner something really beautiful from them and kind of take that away, which is kind of cool. Her relationship with her dad as she got older didn't really get better. They were still kind of distant, but they ended up doing a movie together where they played a father and daughter. There was one scene where they were just having this really beautiful moment, and she wished that she could have said all of these things that this daughter was saying to the dad in the movie, like to her real dad in real life. I mean, granted, it's him, but they're both playing characters, right? But in her mind, she's like, wow, this is like the perfect movie to be doing, because this is everything that I've wanted to say to him for years. Apparently he was very like to the T. We're going to rehearse it exactly how we're going to do it in the moment. And I think the line was something along the lines of like, I just wish we could be friends, or something like that. And in rehearsal, she just would say the line, but like when they were actually filming, she like touched his arm and touched his hand, and they both just broke down crying in the moment. And I'm pretty sure that's the take that's in the movie. But it's beautiful because that really meant something to her in the moment. He never mentioned it afterwards, but she knows that that was kind of a turning point. in their relationship, which is beautiful. And again, even if she couldn't say it to the real him, even if she had to say it in a movie, she got it out. So that was pretty cathartic for her in that regard. One more male relationship in her life. So she did get married again after Roger Vadim when she moved back to the States. Their marriage lasted a couple of years, and then she got married again to Ted Turner. So he's a media mogul. He was extremely, extremely wealthy. The issue is that he didn't want to be alone. He kind of wanted a trophy wife. He didn't want her working. And this is one last time where she really lost herself in her partnerships. I think it's very interesting, Miko, that you're like, no one can love her more than she can love herself. And I think that that's absolutely beautiful because it took divorcing him to recognize that for her. It wasn't until like her 60s, and she's almost 90 now, so God bless this woman. I love her. But it was the last 30 years of her life that she's really been able to do her and like really do her. So that's kind of a wrap on her relationships. I do want one more point, and this is where she starts to cross over into her relationship with Lily Tomlin. In 1980, Jane Fonda was one of the executive producers on 9 to 5, and she wanted to find this really cool cast. So she ended up seeing Lily Tomlin in like a stand-up comedy skit and was like, damn, I'm not doing this movie unless she's in it. She's amazing. We'll talk about Lily more in a minute. Then she's like, I need someone else. I need someone else to represent a different American, like a different woman in America. And Dolly Parton, because why not, right? Two city girls and a country girl all together. So, but this movie, if you haven't seen it, really hits home on like not screwing over, but like fucking the patriarchy and really taking feminism by the horns and kind of saying fuck you to your boss. So if you haven't seen 9 to 5, highly recommend it. But after that, you can see that Jane Fonda has really only done movies where, yes, it's going to be fun for her. Yeah, it may be a box office hit, but like it needs to be something that is going to, even in the tiniest way, like move the needle forward towards wage equality, environmental something, female friendships, right? Like she's always trying to kind of put in that undertone message in there. I also think it's important to note that with being married to Ted Turner, she took a 15-year gap in anything. So if you like look from the late 80s to throughout the 90s, it wasn't until Monster-in-Law came out with her and J-Lo in like the mid 2000s that she was even doing anything. Yeah, so it wasn't even till the mid 2000s that she was doing anything again. So, including activism, right? Like that's wild to have to be so deep in a relationship to lose yourself. And she still calls him her favorite ex-husband, which I think is really interesting. So, since then, her acting career has kind of come back. She's become a lot more active in like climate change, in wage, like equal women's wages. She's been arrested more than several times over the last like decade and a half for all of those things. She's started, I think it's called like Fires Light Fridays or something like that. And that was like moving in, like she moved from LA to Washington in like her 70s or 80s and was like lighting up the government and being like, you need to listen, you need to take action on climate change. Like, what a baller. And if you watch any of her more recent videos, whether it was like for Frank and Gracie or 80 for Brady, like she always finds a way to bring up climate change, and I don't have the balls to do that. Like if I'm being interviewed for something, I don't have the balls to bring that up. So I love that she's just like wholeheartedly herself, and she's like, no dude, like we need to speak about this and you're giving me a platform, Lego. So it's just cool to see that. That's Jane Fonda in a nutshell. That was a long nutshell.
That's giving me shivers. It's so beautiful. Oh, yeah, I don't know. I feel that from her as well. We also additionally have a very accurate birth time for her, which is great news for all the human design people out there. So, for everyone that wants to know, 21st of December 1937. 9:14. And she's just as active as ever, which is fascinating. But I'm bringing this up because we're also going to take a little bit of a look at her environment as well, for example. So she is a wide valleys, and so wide valleys is about really having an ear to the ground as well. So you need to be able to hear all the information that is flowing around you. It is a wide valley, so that means that the information comes from further away. It carries from further away, and the interesting aspect of this is that this information would be dulled, so she wouldn't receive the information the way that she should be receiving this information. When she's over ground, above ground, so when she's able to really hear all the sounds around her, this is when she gets inspired. And I think this is when in connection with the collective aspect as well. So I don't know what she was doing, but the fact that she was also singing and bringing sound and music into the things that she was doing, this was also an important part of her. And I think this is also what rallied her up during these protests, when she was able to hear all of this convolute, everyone together, everyone in the same direction, chanting. And yeah, I can imagine that this was quite a thrill for her. Additionally to that, when we're looking at her entire design, you can see that she doesn't have her ego defined. She has an undefined emotional solar plexus, she has an undefined root, and she has a completely open spleen. So she is relatively open in her chart, in the bottom part of her chart, and she's unconsciously defined in the rest of her chart. She's not a conscious generator. She has a lot of unconscious definitions, or several unconscious definitions, but she's not a conscious generator. However, she's still, the older she got, the more she stepped into the sacral power and sacral energy. It's such a beautiful mix to see the fitness journey, the collective fighting for something. And also when you look at her fitness videos, you see that she's always doing it in groups. She's always got a team of people behind her. I think it's mostly women, I'm not sure. But it's usually always a team of people, or she's doing it maybe with one other person, but it's usually a team of people behind her. At least that's how I remember them. I think we even had a video of hers. It's really good. But yeah, I know when I was just Googling it, I've seen this cover before, so I know that my parents had it. Yeah, but I love the combination of both of these things. So yeah, she's a quad right, which I also found very interesting. So she's someone that, while she does have this consistent energy, she does also need her resting period. She's a 2-4 profile as well, very much in need of these resting periods, of these stepping away, not only being with friends and family, which is a big part of her profile as well, this PR, but within the family and friends circle, it's not really that much about stepping out and connecting with a lot of strangers. But her relationships probably came about, or when they were healthy, they came about when she was introduced to someone through someone. So she doesn't just go up to strangers on the train or something like this. It's more of a, hey, I know someone, you should meet them. And I wonder how Lily and her met, if this was also through a connection. So she said, hey, I really want to work with her, and then someone connected her or something.
I believe both Lily and Dolly Parton had the same agent. So she went through the agent, talked to Lily first, then went through the agent. It's like, yo, I want both of these girls. And it took them forever to say yes, both of them.
Oh my God. Best yes they ever made. Best decision of yes. But yeah, it makes sense. It's correct. for Lily, because she's an emotional being, emotional inner authority, manifesting generator.
One last thing I want to add in is the biggest thing that came out of her third act is her female friendships. She said life has been nothing prior to having female friendships. And if you recall, she was kind of a tomboy growing up. She had a couple of friends in high school. They were probably not the best influences on her, but in her third act, she says that her female friendships are the best thing in her world and that she learns from people who are her besties every day.
I can relate to that so much.
At least you're not in your third act realizing it, though. You're in your first and a half act.
Yeah, but I was also a tomboy, and for me, being friends with women was something that I just couldn't fathom. And then it's just started, I don't know, 5 years ago, something like this, where they became more and more important in my life. And it's a beautiful thing because you really get to know yourself as well through these other women, and you're really getting to know your feminine side and your feminine power. And yeah, I think that's a very beautiful part. There's beauty in both types of relationship. I mean, my oldest, closest friend is a man still to this day, but well, maybe not closest, but the one that I've known for the longest, and he's like a brother to me. So yeah, that's the kind of relationship I have with him. And it's a beautiful friendship, but there still is quite a difference between a friendship between a man and a woman, and women being friends together, because we really get to hone in on our creative power, on our intuition, on our nurturing, there's just so much strength in feminine energy. So I can understand her sentiment in this, and this is really, really beautiful to hear that she has found this path. I think what we're going to do, and don't kill me for that, but we're going to divide this episode into a two-parter.
Yeah, let's cliffhang. Guys, do we even know when Lily Tomlin was born? No, we don't. We're going to find out next week.
Mic drop.
It's something Googleable, though, so I guess you could look it up between now and next week. But there's a lot more information.
I think this is a great cliffhanger, especially because we teased her throughout this episode quite a few times. I don't want to rush through it, and also look at the connection between both of them and dive a little bit deeper into that, because I think there's a lot to uncover there as well. And I really enjoyed this deep dive into Jane Fonda's history.
Happy to hear it. Story time with Chell and Miko / human design. So I have less of a book on Lily than I had on Jane.
That's all good. She needs to start writing. Thank you everyone for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Bye guys.
Bye everyone.